Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thanks once again for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce, and I'm a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host, or in this case, many co-hosts, to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, expertise, and unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is exploring DevOps and developer career paths. And so I'd like to take a moment and briefly introduce our co-host panel for tonight's session. All right, we'll start with Brooks. Brooks Johnson is a software engineer and senior developer at the Insulet Corporation. He's a 6-time certified application architect. He hosts a YouTube channel where he creates and shares original Salesforce development content, and he served in the Army for over 20 years. Welcome, Brooks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're not already familiar with Copado, it is the first DevOps platform built for the low-code software as a service world, originally Salesforce, and now branching out to include Heroku, MuleSoft, Commerce Cloud, and more. We have 5 DevOps professionals joining us from Copado. Ashley Dodge is the Senior Director of Community. In addition to being an expert at building communities, she volunteers for several women in tech organizations in her free time. Russ Lott is a Regional Vice President in charge of sales at Copado. He served in the Army as an intelligence analyst before beginning his sales career. Phil Barow is also a Regional Vice President and is focused in financial services. He served as an officer in the Air Force. Alexander Snyder is the Senior DevOps Engineer and began his tech career in the Army as a computer network operator. And Steve Kluth is the Director of IT at Copado and served in the Navy as an avionics technician. So I've been looking forward to this panel and I'm extremely excited to dig into DevOps and development topics. Thanks so much, Copado team, for joining the session tonight. I appreciate it. And so what we'll do here real quick is I'll go over some admin items for the folks that may be jumping on for the first time, because I see some new faces out there, which is awesome. The purpose of these office hours is to gather informally with military trailblazers and allies to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding related topics in order to help you achieve your professional development and career related goals. Please keep an eye on the chat window during tonight's session. I, as well as others on the call, typically post things in chat to include, employment opportunities, articles, and lots of great information. And I've got a lot to post tonight. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during today's session, please feel free to do so. This is your session. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, no worries. You can post your questions in chat, and I'll be scanning that. And you can also raise your hand in the Google Meet app, and I'll be looking for that as well. So to provide some context for the audience, I will throw out the first couple of questions. One for our Copado panel, and then one for Brooks. And so to Copado, and anyone can answer, everyone can answer, could you please explain what DevOps is and what role it plays in the development, deployment, and maintenance of Salesforce instances?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a small question.
So I mean, from the base level, right? DevOps is just that combination of development and operations, right? It's everybody does DevOps because everybody does development and everybody does operations. But I think as we've really matured and tried to put a process around what does good DevOps look like, it's been how do we find ways to help people efficiently move technology towards meeting their business process needs. And how do we help people move quickly and really move what we talk about is moving at the speed of business. And so DevOps is the thing that allows you to move quickly. And so it encompasses a lot of things, right? It encompasses ideation, it encompasses development, it encompasses testing, it encompasses, doing, packaging and releases and monitoring and all of those things that go from kind of ideation to release, and then kind of that monitoring stream along the way. And so, when we talk about doing this in the Salesforce instance specifically, one of the things that I love to talk about with people is this isn't some sort of crazy magic bullet or something that people haven't been doing. People have been doing this for a decade. The thing that people haven't been able to do is take all of these things that work outside of Salesforce and make it work for Salesforce. And so Salesforce being the low-code platform, right, the easy platform, as it's become a real enterprise platform that companies are actually managing their business on, it started to get those enterprise problems that come along with being an enterprise platform. And now we have a way to actually take these practices and start applying the things that companies have built for a decade outside of Salesforce to Salesforce and actually get kind of that decade worth of maturity in a single swoop.
Awesome. Now that makes a lot of sense. Did anybody else from the Copado team want to weigh in?
I agree with what he said. Real good job.
Yeah, I would weigh in, but Russ really nailed it.
Awesome. All right. So that's great. I appreciate you kind of setting the tone for what DevOps is, because a lot of folks on the call may not be familiar, maybe joining for the first time, or maybe brand new to the tech world and to the Salesforce ecosystem. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Brooks now. Brooks, could you talk about your role as a software engineer and senior developer and walk us through what a typical day looks like for you? And then, closing that out, if you have any thoughts about DevOps and how that features in your daily work cycle, that'd be great as well.
Oh yeah. It's fine. I mean, like I said, because the first word is, and it's development and operations, right? I mean, I feel like 10 minutes don't go by where I don't think about DevOps, in some way on a project. But so as a developer, software engineer in the Salesforce platform, to kind of follow Salesforce is the low code platform, but I feel like it's become much more than that over time. As another friend of mine said, it's really become a platform for developing business applications, and much more than just a CRM, right? I mean, I know at Insulet, the business lives on. Obviously, we're integrated to all sorts of other external things, but the business is run on Salesforce, and it is an enterprise code base with all the challenges that comes with. So a typical, I'm going to say it, if we are getting ready to ramp up on a project, I might be thinking a little more about software design and best practices and how do we actually want to build this thing, right? Like, what kind, do we need UML diagrams, all these, all those other things. Right now I'm in a project that I think we're actually on our last sprint, right? So, typical days, I'm usually going to sit down, I'm going to take a look at DevOps, right? Pending open pull requests that I have, do my code reviews, and all some of this, the code analysis that, PMD will soon hopefully automate for me, or not PMD, Copado. Then it's stand up, which is, going to be a daily ritual for most teams, whether you're a developer or business analyst or not. Every project's going to usually have a stand up. Then I try to kind of really carve out and keep I think especially for software development, it's very important to have uninterrupted stretches where you work. And I think that's actually an important thing to set. I say as a senior developer with team culture, right? Like, hey, put your do not disturb on, turn off your notifications, right? Like you need to focus and you need to code. And that's pretty much what I'm going to do for the big chunk of the day. I'm going, or especially where, in a project that's where it's at now, I'm going to code. And then towards the end of the day, I'll kind of flip the cycle back. Like what are the pull requests that are pending, open, rinse, repeat. Okay. Code review, merge, deploy, do a lot of stuff that actually, like I said, I think, that right now we're doing manually that, I could say at Insulet, depending on the org we're using, Copado is solving for us. But I think it's great to bring these two things together, because if you get into development, you're going to think about DevOps all the time. And I think that's where most people that go into DevOps probably started, right? And one day you became the release manager, or you were just the person on your team that knew the most about Git, and somehow now you're the DevOps person, right? So that's in a nutshell. I guess maybe that would be how I spend my day. A lot of time staring at an IDE.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, Brooks, for sharing. So now that we have a bit of context on kind of both ends of the spectrum, from a career path perspective, DevOps and development, I want to turn it back over to the audience to see what questions you might have. As always, I come up with questions that I'm curious about and happy to ask those, but this is not my session. This is your session. So I'll give you a moment. Feel free to post it in chat or raise your hand if anyone has any questions. And while you're thinking about that, Ashley, did you want to mention the training-focused resource for military members that you and the Copado team are coming up with?
Yeah, I'd love to. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So as you all saw, David did pop a few links in the chat window there. So if you can click those, or you can type in the URLs from here. But as I mentioned earlier, as David mentioned in my introduction, I lead the community at Copado, which is powered by more than 40,000 developers around the world, DevOps professionals. We have different programs where you can connect and learn. We have a free academy, much like the Trailblazer Academy, that's all focused on DevOps. With learning modules. We have 3 certification paths and a 4th one that's going to be announced next week. So be sure to hop on over to success.copado.com and join the community. And then we've also launched just this past week the Copado Military Discussion Group. So this is a designated space within the community for our friends from Military Trailblazers, where you can come and chat, ask questions, form study groups, those sort of things as you pursue more learning within DevOps and within Copado. And then second to that, to really try to help provide a pathway for those who are learning Salesforce admins, Salesforce developers, or brand new to the Salesforce ecosystem, we're also launching a military-focused training session that will start on December 1st and run through February 2nd. So if you take a look at the dates here, December 1st and December 15th, this is a prerequisite course. So if you don't have your Salesforce admin certification, pick one of these 2 days, and that will kind of get you enough information that you can get started on learning Copado while maybe you pursue your admin, on the side. If you already have your Salesforce admin certification, you don't need to attend on December 1st and 15th. You can jump straight into the next 3 workshops, which are January 5th, which is Copado Fundamentals 1. That's kind of the foundation of everything that you need to know to navigate Copado, understand the value of a DevOps solution. And then on January 19th, there's kind of the next course that layers on top of that. And then February 2nd, the final course. So you can register and get all this information on this series at that go.copado.com address at the bottom. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Thanks for
so
the
much,
opportunity
Ashley.
to join and share about this, David.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal resource. My pleasure. Thank you so much for putting that together. It's awesome. So Elijah asked a question, and I kind of humorously responded. But his question is, "What's your favorite DevOps tools and why?" I said Copado. But in all seriousness, in both, I guess Brooks initially. Now, obviously, there's multiple different pieces of the puzzle that you'll use to execute DevOps. So what are some tools that you use, maybe from an IDE perspective and other tools to help you get through your development work?
So I'm going to say, I think the universal tools, regardless of, if you're using Copado or what IDE you use, I think the universal tools come down to the command line and Git, right? I mean, you've got to, the more comfortable you are with Git, the more comfortable you are going to be, in my opinion, with Copado, right? Which is I think is a fantastic tool. But the more you understand, right, what does it mean to check out, to merge, to all these things. So I don't think you need to be a Git pro, right? That you need to go in and know how to rewrite history and do Git patch and all these. But I think a real good foundation in Git and understanding how to work from the terminal are always will be timeless, right? Like those, no matter what the technology is 10 years from now, I think we'll all still be using some flavor of Git and working from the terminal.
And Brooks, if I could piggyback on that, and Dwayne, I do see your question. We'll tackle that one next. To say, for those folks that are brand new to development, if you could just really briefly explain what Git is, that might be helpful for them.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to first, Git is a version control tool, right? Originally developed by, Linux Torvald for the Linux kernel. But it is the standard, across the world now for managing your version control on all software development projects. So what that lets my team do, or any other team, is, right, so each developer has their own sandbox. We're each working on our stories, and we have, the sacred piece of code, and we each check out our own copy and we do our work. right? And then at the end of the day, each developer can use Git to say, hey, here's my version, here's my changes, and I can look at that and put them back into the main branch. But it's very much for either of the fields here we talk about today, I think development or DevOps. It's one of those things maybe when you're starting off that people don't tell you you're going to need to know, but you really do.
That's great. Thank you, Brooks. I appreciate it. And we've got some more questions coming in. Dwayne asked the Copado team, is Copado more of a project management tool?
So, I mean, I'm happy to tackle that one also. And the answer is in some cases. So not exactly, because Copado is more of a platform than a point tool. So it has some project management stuff built into it, but it's not a Jira, right? It's not a place where you're managing user stories. It has some limited, if you don't have a Jira, it certainly has some limited functionality that you can take advantage of. But really it's kind of the underlying piece that pulls the rest of those other components that Brooks was talking about together. So if you don't have an automated testing tool, we have automated testing. But if you're using an automated testing tool, we can take the tool that you already have and plug it into kind of our core Copado suite. So what we do is we actually are like a master orchestrator. So you build the workflow to make sure that everybody is following the appropriate process and no steps are being skipped. And we enforce that. And then we also help automate the steps. So all of these repetitive steps that you're doing, we help do that. And we help, kick these things off. And we can't, it's like, if you want to make sure that you're kicking off tests every time, we do that. If you're building custom quality gates, we can do that. If you want to make sure that we actually handle, so you were talking about Git, we actually handle your version control for you on the back end. So having a base level understanding of Git certainly is helpful. But we do a lot of your Git work for you on the back end as well, automated also. So really, we're kind of that underlying foundation that pulls in. We attach Jira, we attach your testing tool, we attach your Git repository, we attach all of those things, and we make it all one seamless platform for you. And Copado is like that seamless platform, that CI platform that you're plugging the other stuff into to make it one seamless workflow.
Yeah, and Russ, if I can piggyback on that, another part of the Salesforce story, which is very large part of the Salesforce value, is the citizen developer and the low code tools. And Brooks lives in a world of working from the command line and Apex code, and that is some very powerful stuff. But there's also a lot of process builder and flows and all sorts of functions that people can make with just clicks and not code. But a lot of times those citizens developers, they don't have the tool to back up their work, to create a version history of what they've been doing. And if they started to use like the command line, it might not go as planned. So Copado actually allows those groups of developers to use a version control system in a graphical way, so they don't even know that their work is using Git, but they still have access to all of their history, and they can go back to previous versions. They can share their work. They can merge their work into a master branch, just as if they were a professional developer, but with a high level of abstraction.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Russ and Phil. Let's see. So we've got more questions coming in. Phil, and this is actually, it's funny, Phil, because Phil Howell, you had the same question that I had put into my notes to ask. And so he's saying, I'm curious to know how Copado team sees themselves in relation to competitors. What makes them the best choice? How much market share do they enjoy? And how is it trending?
So I could just take a brief quick at that, and then Russ or anybody else want to jump in. And I think it's really different by vertical, right? Like, different verticals have different profiles about how they develop on the platform. I work in the financial services vertical, and I would say our biggest competitor is, self-implementing. People saying, on a development team, we can handle this. We'll cobble together a system with Git. Maybe we'll use Jenkins. Maybe we'll use changesets and do it on our own. And they haven't realized that there's an opportunity to optimize that part of their process. And what we find is those development teams spend a lot more time on managing their releases than they do on developing, novel and interesting features for their users. And so, a lot of our argument to the value is, well, do you want to spend your time releasing your software, or do you want to spend your time innovating? And, that's why we feel we're, an innovation platform that speeds the development.
And I would agree with that 100%. If it's just a piggyback with, I'll say right now, like in Insulet, we have some environments that are on Copado, some that are not. And, as a senior developer, I spend a lot of my day, frankly, doing, kind of tedious grunt work. That, a tool like Copado would automate a lot of that away from me and let me get back to building. Right. So, yeah, I think it's, I think that was really spot on.
Awesome. Thank you. More questions coming in. Oh, and it looks like, Russ, you answered it. Nate has asked, would Copado be used to supplement Microsoft Team Foundation Server or TFS? And Russ has responded that it could be yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The way that I like to talk about it is, so TFS, for people who don't know, that's Team Foundation Server. And as they've moved to the cloud, they've really rebranded that Azure DevOps. And then they've continued to build on that. And they started to put things like a Git repository attached to that. And so, with the acquisition of GitLab, whichever acquisition it was, they started to bake that into that, and they've made it more of their own platform there. And lots of people are standardizing on that, right? Lots of people are using either TFS on premise or Azure DevOps in the cloud. And our goal is not to replace that. Our goal is, again, to make that work for Salesforce, because you're building these things on TFS or Azure DevOps outside of Salesforce. Our goal is to be the plugin. So like they have a pipeline product. That pipeline product doesn't work for Salesforce because Salesforce is a platform as a service, and it has its own little niche things that it does, that's different, right? It does metadata instead of code and things like that just don't work with the TFS pipeline stuff. But Copado does. And so we can then just plug in and make that where you're standardized on TFS. We can make that then work for you for your Salesforce environments.
I appreciate the added clarification. Thank you. Elijah asks, does Copado move change sets 10 times faster? And will it move all picklist values? So I guess if you could talk a little bit about how change sets compare, how the antiquated change sets compare to what Copado provides. And if there's any limitations on the data it can move, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, Phil should talk about that because he has a great conversation track about moving to the user story away from change sets.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So, obviously everybody in development has heard, of the user story in relation to Jira and what it does. But Copado, we have a slightly different definition of what a user story is, and it's actually fundamental to why we're different. Like our user story is the smallest little grouping of metadata that describes one feature in Salesforce. So if you remove a line of code or XML from there, the feature will no longer work. It's almost like an atomic unit. And this thing is actually really powerful because it allows us to, do a lot of very specific things that you couldn't do. Because now at this point, you're dealing with some code that's maybe, 25 to 50 lines long, as opposed to code that's trying to do multiple things, accessing multiple objects that could be anywhere from 500 to thousands of lines long. And so with this little user story, as developers are developing their developer sandbox, the Copado platform actually goes in and compares all these user stories and helps detect when two developers may be working on the same object in the same field at the same time, so that you can detect these conflicts sooner, much sooner than you would if you got to the integration or user acceptance testing. And we find that actually reduces a lot of rework, right? And so the user story also, as Russ alluded to earlier, helps us have much more targeted quality gates. You can go do code scans, you can do compliance checks to make sure you're setting the right permissions on this one user story, and it happens a whole lot faster. The other thing that we love about it is, since it's one feature, you can release one user story at a time. So if you're running a 30-day sprint and a developer happens to finish one piece of work on day 3 of that sprint, you don't have to wait 27 days to release that into production. So your business users can then get that feature to happen much quicker. We can group these user stories together. And so in reality, what happens is these user stories become almost like a Delta deployment. You're only deploying into production like the differences, as opposed to change sets where you have to deploy the, a large part of the code base every time that you want to, make an update. And so it's naturally, much, much faster. Just as an anecdote, we're working with one large, insurer that I'm sure everybody on this call probably uses for the homeowners insurance. And that it was taking them, up to half a day sometimes to release this, gigabyte file into their Salesforce org. And, we did some work with them and got them using the user story properly. And we reduced that size of the file down to like under 500 megabytes. And it was happening, in minutes as opposed to hours. So it is a very powerful part about what our platform is and how we are able to do, deliver the value that we do.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I think we've all experienced the frustrations of change sets and the limitations inherent in using that feature. We've got a couple questions coming in. And so, Phil, another great question. Could we hear a little bit more about the training program that's coming up? What impact will it have on the value of the participants to potential employers? And I'll piggyback that on that to say, for those that complete the training course, what extra work is required to be certified in Copado?
Yeah, those are all great questions. So the training program that's coming up is a dedicated stream of workshops where it's a live instructor that actually walks you through the material. So you have your self-paced learning in the Copado Academy that you can go and do ahead of time to familiarize yourself. And then you get 3 hours with a Copado sales engineer, so someone who uses and works in the tool day after day. And they kind of guide you through a series of hands-on activities to make sure that everything you've learned in the modules, you know how to apply. So really, after you've completed those modules and the workshop, you've done all of the work that you need to do to go and take your certification. Some folks do want to, study in between, go back and retrace their steps on what they did in the workshop, so you get access to a recording from it so that you can do that as well. And then we would also give you a voucher code that would waive the fee of the exam, which is about $250 for the first 2 and $500 for the third level. So a little bit of a monetary perk there as well. And then in terms of the impact it will have on you and potential employers, I would highly recommend that you all go check out the 2019 State of Salesforce DevOps report. It really breaks down the careers, the opportunities, the compensation by region, by country, all of that. So there's a wealth of good information there. But a few of the things that really stood out to me is that DevOps roles are one of the fastest growing roles in tech right now, most in demand. And in 2019 to 2020 alone, in Salesforce DevOps, there was about a 20% salary increase. So there's a huge demand as well as huge earning opportunity there. And I think, most organizations are looking for people that have experience using DevOps tools that are on the Salesforce platform. So I think, there's a ton of opportunity there. We also have a job board that's kind of in beta where we're working with some of our current customers to post jobs that are available in Salesforce and DevOps. These range from admin, business analysts to DevOps engineers. So that's another perk that you'll get access to once you have joined into the community. I think, did I get all 3 parts of your question, Phil?
Yeah, that was great. Good job.
Great.
David Albright, I believe, had the next question. And he says, hey, Brooks, you have quite the background from infantry to developer. That took grit, for lack of a better word. What's your words of advice for the group on how to stick to it and power through that pivot?
Yeah, well, I have the least technical background imaginable, right? I was a infantry and a recruiter. I never did anything technical. And I guess the story I was telling, because I think, Dave and I entered this industry around the same time. So the first time I went on Trailhead, and I think back then they had kind of salaries somewhere, like an admin makes this, a developer makes this, and I think it was a consultant. There were 3 things. And the developer made the most. I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm going to do that one. I'm going to be a developer. And this is cool. I'll do this intro to development trail, and I'll be making big bucks. And so I hopped on there, and everybody's done this on Trailhead knows that intro to developer basic, that basic developer trail, pretty much the same as the, the admin trail, really. And I'm kind of cruising along, and I'm making custom fields, and I can do this, right? Until I got to that first one where you had to make a trigger. And obviously, like 5 years later, this seems like the most trivial thing in the world to me, but the wheels totally fell off at that point. I said, oh my God, I have no idea. And this was like, you're going to capitalize a letter or something was all this trigger did, right? And I was totally lost. So it obviously took a couple of years of kind of back off and figure this stuff out. So I think the advice, the two things I would, when you're starting off, and I think the things that are most intimidating are, I know for me, it was initially, it's like, how are we supposed to memorize all this stuff? And I talked to a friend of mine who, been a developer for many years, and he was like, wait, you don't. That's not how software works, right? He's like, you'll remember the stuff you do every day. You're going to memorize that, right? Everything else, you'll look it up when you need it. So don't get completely intimidated by I'm in the Apex developer docs every day. Like what's some string method I can use or something, right? So don't let that intimidate you. And also, and I think probably with that same piece is the most intimidating part for a new programmer. I think, especially if you're approaching this out any CSS or computer science background, CSS background, that's a whole different thing, is syntax, right? Because you look at a developer's IDE, and it's all these crazy kind of like arcane symbols and what's going on. And frankly, that's muscle memory. And in 6 months, you'll and I would say arguably the absolute least interesting part about software development, once you've been doing it for a while, is syntax. That's the stuff you let AI your IDE do for you. So obviously you have to do it, and it takes practice, but don't let syntax, and these are just things you've got to deal with. But that's at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to you just gotta practice and do it every day. If it was easy to do, I would say the job market would look radically different than it does right now. If it was easy to become, a developer, right? The demand would not be so much higher than the supply. So just like anything else, right? It's gonna take time. It's not easy to do. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, right? It's gonna take, honestly, years, not years to learn to code, but to really be good. It's a process. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. One of the questions I had that you just answered was, if you don't have previous experience or a background in computer science, can you be, a developer, and can you learn the skills to quickly get up to speed and make a living from it? And as you've shown, Brooks, the answer is yes, but it's not going to be easy.
It's not easy, and in no way do I want to diminish the value of a computer science degree. I think they are tremendously valuable, and it's almost you're approaching the same skill set from two different angles. I think because I'm back in school now, several years later, doing a master's in software development at Boston University. But I think a lot of CS, you may learn more theory first and less about actual programming. While for a lot of us, you probably start with programming first and learn the theory later. And you can get a job knowing how to, string together. If you can put together working syntax, you can probably get a job. But to really take your career to that next level, right, to become that senior developer, that tech lead, that software engineer, you're going to need to go back, and you are going to need to understand, right, how, some idea of data structures, algorithms, how operating systems work, a little bit closer to the metal. So I said, yeah, you absolutely can get started without it. And in 2021, 22, everything's probably free and on YouTube anyway. But I don't at all want to diminish the importance of, I think, the knowledge you get from that sort of curriculum.
Yeah, I would add, it's the need is there, but it's there at every level too. So for people who are looking to make the change, and that's one of the great things about Salesforce. I make the joke all the time about how, Salesforce was made so that you could hire your local waitress to be your Salesforce admin. But it's true. literally our one of our directors of RevOps became an executive assistant. He was or she was a hostess at one of our CEO's favorite restaurants, and they developed a great relationship. And she began working for his wife, and then she began working for him. Worked in a small company, started learning this stuff, and she became, she started doing all of this work for us in Salesforce. And over the course of years, she's learned how to do more and more. And now she's a director, and she's been doing this. But she started with this low skill set, this low technical skill set that over time has become, now she's leading a team of people. But it's built so that you can start there and grow from there. And there is a vast need for even just people to come in and be admins now and learn how to do more of the functional things that you do as you grow. But there is a vast need for people just to get started who can do a lot of the basic administrative work as well.
No, thank you, Russ. And that kind of ties into a question that Dan has asked in chat, and I'll read it out here on how kind of DevOps works. For companies that employ it. Is someone on the DevOps team usually at the table with the client, or are they getting user stories from, say, a business analyst, or both? How does that typically work?
Well, I'll take a stab at that because, I don't think that there's any one standard practice. But, I have taken a couple courses on Scrum and Agile management. And, I think the most successful companies of getting, the business users what they want really starts with a conversation like with the business of, how do you want your day-to-day, workflow to work within Salesforce? Finding out, interviewing them, like what's important to you. And now that we know what's important to you, well, what's most important to you? Because you probably have a whole notebook full of ideas at this point. And, there's a lot of processes, around Agile and Scrum that really focus in on, delivering the value back to the business user that they asked for. And it really always focuses on delivering a finished product that is usable. Because a lot of, the pitfalls of software development is, getting people to agree on, when a feature is actually done, right? And a developer may think it's done, but then, a manager might be, well, you didn't test it, so it's not done. And then, the manager might think it's done, but the business user might say, well, but it doesn't have this functionality that I'm looking for, so then it's not really done. And so a lot of these management practices are all around, how do we organize ourselves to get that piece of work, quickest back to the business. And so I guess from my point of view, the more you can tie back to your business user, the more they're going to see value in your work.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. Another question from Dwayne. Since there are so many different, and I guess this is probably for Brooks, since there are so many different trails, what trail would you recommend starting out for the Salesforce developer path?
Yeah, so that's, I guess I actually saw that. I went to my Trailhead. And I think it's the developer beginner one. So what I'm going to say, so Salesforce is a business platform. And I say days might actually go by where I don't really log into Salesforce these days, right? You know what I mean? I'm just working for my IDE. I'm writing code. I'm pushing code. Everybody needs to know how Salesforce works, right? You need to know what's an S object, right? What is what's a custom field? You need to know all of those things. You need to understand how it is tied to the data layer. And I think that trail does a really good job with that. This might be a little bit of heresy though, but I don't actually, in my opinion, Trailhead is a good place to learn particulars of the Apex programming language, right? Like this is how you write a queuable class. I don't think it's actually, and I don't think it's designed for this. It's not like the best tool to learn how to build good software though. I think actually the Salesforce Developers YouTube channel has fantastic content. I'm going to say there, I think Kevin Portman is my hero amongst programmers, right? Those guys do amazing content that I think is well worth your time to watch. And I think probably everybody, if you're trying to get into this besides Trailhead, I think there's fantastic probably courses on Udemy, YouTube channels. It's great for everybody, I think, to be familiar with books like Clean Code by Bob Martin, right? Test-driven development by Kent Beck. So I guess that was kind of a long way of do Trailhead. You need to know those features, but there's a lot of, in my opinion, to really be job ready, there's a lot of other stuff out there that probably you're not really going to find on Trailhead.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Brooks. And I'd argue with you that I'm probably less technically able than you are or were starting out. So I'm the lowest common denominator when it comes to learning how to do anything code related. Yet I was still able to get my Platform Developer 1 cert, and on the first try, because I'd looked around at all the different resources, and while Trailhead does provide you with some foundational knowledge, it's certainly not enough to get you over the finish line. What really did it for me, and helped me quite a bit, is what David Albright just put in chat, David Liu's Apex Academy. So if you are a prospective developer, then take a look. He's on Pluralsight, which is a course vendor website, and they have free weekends, and you can actually knock out his entire course in a weekend and not have to pay any money. And he encourages you to do that. Great guy. But that really broke it down at the most fundamental level of how to create a trigger and what you're doing with respect to all the different elements of building code. The other thing I would say is learn flows. I really began to understand what they were trying to do with code, with Apex, once I started digging into flows. And as you're probably aware, building flows is essentially a visual way of writing code on the back end. And so that will help you in your coding journey as well. All right. Any other questions from folks? Check in chat here. All right. And I also did post the Salesforce developer portal, which is a great resource from Salesforce with a lot of different assets, and they just actually redesigned it, so it's pretty helpful. Let's see. I actually have a couple questions. Let me just find my notes here. So I guess for the Copado team, how can Trailblazers interested in DevOps introduce these practices at their company? So if your company's not currently using a DevOps tool, how can they get, how can you get your managers and your implementation teams interested and bring that about? What are some thoughts and recommendations you have?
I would say if your company isn't currently using it, but you're interested in it, you're interested in getting into that field, I would suggest embracing it at home, embracing it on your in your own time. That's how I got started in the DevOps world. Was I at my company, I think somebody mentioned it earlier, I was the guy who knew Git, and then I became slowly, or then I was the guy that knew Chef. And so I just evolved into that role, but I took it offline and I took it home, and I really started to develop it because the team that I was with didn't do that, didn't embrace those principles. And so I learned that methodology. I learned those tools. I learned those things at home. That way I could then take that methodology and find the spots where I could inject it, and I could start using those methodologies and tools within the work that I was already doing. So the company itself might not have embraced it fully at that time. They eventually did, but at that time, I was able to take my agile skills that I had learned, take the methodologies that I had learned, and start producing work that for at least for me, became far more efficient, quicker, automated, things like that. So I would say embrace it at home first, and that's the best way.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander.
I'd like to add my 2 cents here. I think the best way to really get your company to embrace good DevOps practice is to call Russ Lott.
So I will say, from a military perspective, anybody remember op orders? So if you remember op orders, really there is a lot of things that go down on those, right? And if you take them from kind of a top level all the way down to the individual soldier, you lose some stuff along the way. But one of the things that always goes through is kind of that commander's intent, right? And so, the thing that I always look at is like, what's the commander's intent at our lower level, right? At where we're at, if what we're trying to push out to our teams, or if we're having stuff sent to us that we're working on, like what's their intent? What are they trying to do? And how do we make that better? And so it's like you talked earlier about, it's like everybody's like, oh, I know the change. I know the pain of change sets, right? But like, how do you take that pain that you want to eliminate and say, this is why it's important that we eliminate that? Well, what's the commander's intent? What's the intent of the company? What are you guys trying to accomplish? Are you guys even doing any development that you need to release changes? And why is it important that we move faster on that? And I think if you start looking at that and you start saying, hey, I know we're trying to accomplish these things, and these are the other things that are standing in our way of doing that. And there's tons of processes that have been around for years and years and years that we're not taking advantage of. And I'd like to start figuring out how we can start taking advantage of and maturing our processes here. I mean, that's usually very well accepted to say, we have this thing we're trying to accomplish as a team, as an organization, and I want to eliminate the obstacles in our way, and here's how we do it. I mean, people just naturally say, well, we'll at least look at that and see if we can figure out how to make ourselves more successful around this.
And you know, being an SE and with demos near and dear to my heart, I'm assuming that you guys will also be happy to demo kind of the power of Copado for prospective customers using some of your playgrounds and whatnot.
Oh no, we don't ever want you guys to see our stuff. Yeah, absolutely. If anybody ever wants to see a live demo, just let us know, and we'll be happy to set up some time with you guys to see a live demo. And our engineers will probably kill me for saying this, but we're also happy to help set it up even in a sandbox environment for you guys and let you play around with it, you know, away from your production environment, but just like let you see it work with your own data and metadata and see that it's actually going to work for you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, and to kind of revisit the training and certification piece for Copado that we talked about earlier in the session, you know, if you're sitting there on the call and you're wondering, gosh, you know, I'm new to DevOps or I'm new to Salesforce, I don't know if I can do it. Again, I'll return to the lowest common denominator, which is me, and I was able to actually get certified in Copado. I have 3 certifications within a month, and so you can definitely do it. They have an amazing community, which I've shared the link in chat here, and those links will also be available on the YouTube channel. But the community is obviously based on a Salesforce model. There's knowledge articles that you can access. They actually have Trailhead-like badges that you can go in and learn about new releases and features. So it's this immersive learning environment that makes it very easy to get certified. On that note, question for the Copado team from me: you know, what are some careers either at Copado or, you know, elsewhere in the customer or partner ecosystem that you see cropping up, and how can folks prepare for careers in DevOps as it concerns Copado?
Yep. So,
there are a ton of career opportunities within DevOps and within Copado. I think what's really interesting, as much of the team has described tonight, is that DevOps really touches all parts of the process. So whether you are a quality engineer or a developer or an admin or a business analyst or a project manager, understanding DevOps strategy is going to benefit you. And so part of a lot of the trails that we have teach you the strategy and the methodology on top of the tooling. So it doesn't necessarily, you know, pigeonhole you to only know Copado. It will broaden your understanding of the process end to end. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And then of course, like any organization internally, you know, we have opportunities all over the place, from marketing to the community team to development roles, sales roles. So there's really a pretty wide gamut there, and you can check those out on our website too.
Yeah,
Steve, were you chiming in?
Yeah, I was basically going to say just be willing to learn and really get the fundamentals of the process and the theories behind DevOps down, because you'll find as you progress in your career from ground zero that a lot of these concepts will apply in many different fields. As the IT director, which feels kind of weird being in this group with that title, I take a lot of the lessons learned from my earlier points in my career as a release manager, as a build engineer, and still applying those to a completely different set of problems, but they still apply, and they're very good patterns in general that can help you throughout the rest of your technical career.
Yeah, I would say, look, if you just assume that you have to spend some time learning, on Trailhead, on YouTube, on other sites out there, how this all works, and it's time well invested. The most important thing really is reaching out, connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to talk to vets. It might not be during the week because I'm busy, but I'll pick up the phone on a Saturday for a vet and talk about career opportunities. Like, people picked up the phone for me, and you should pass it on to the next vet, and we're here to help each other, whether people are currently in the military and transitioning, or people have been out like 10 years or 20 years. Like, you'll always be a vet. And I'm very happy to, help anybody out that I can in this group.
No, thank you.
Yeah. I think from a more specific even job perspective, I mean, we build and sell products. So, we need developers that build product here internally, because we have multiple products that we continue to build and mature. And so here at Copado, we need developers. We always need developers. Our development team is booming. And then on top of that, we need architects and implementation managers that deliver our products to other customers. And then those customers need people that continue to run those for them or teach them how to mature and develop over time. I mean, I can tell you firsthand from dealing with, probably 50 customers over the last year, that almost every single one of them is dying for somebody that understands release management in a way that they can be a release manager for their company. And they're looking for 4 and they have 0, right? Like they're like, can you help us with 1? And then we've got companies like Revelant out there who will train you to use certain specific products around things like CPQ or Copado or other things like that. And then they do contract to perm opportunities where their goal is to go in and put you in, and they literally place you for like 12 months. And then you go on full time with the customer from there. So there's tons of opportunities out there around DevOps, around Copado, with Copado clients. There's lots of opportunity out there. And frankly, for release managers, I'm not kidding. We are dying to find competent release managers for clients. Dying.
We're dying to hire one too. So yeah.
See?
So there you go. Access Copado's free training resources that they put out earlier and prepare for a career in DevOps, because there's definitely a need. Hannah asks, what's the difference between a release manager and a DevOps engineer? Great question, Hannah. I am curious about that as well.
I can field that, I think. So release manager is a specific job function within the greater software development ecosystem, whereas DevOps engineer is, DevOps is more of an overall approach that the entire company needs to embrace, that is designed to sort of break down the barrier between development and operations so that everybody's pulling the same direction at the same time and collaborating more effectively together, with the outcome of being able to deliver more value to your customers faster and with a better quality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think also you run into, from time to time, people will use engineer as kind of a blanket term, and so they're like, "Oh, are you a developer? You're an engineer. Oh, are you an architect? You're an engineer. Oh, are you a release manager? You're an engineer." And so, so it really is kind of, how do they define it, right? Because there's a difference between, they may say DevOps engineer, and what they mean is a developer or a release manager or an architect. And so those different functions, it's like you have developers who are creating things. You have your testers who could also be considered engineers who are running tests and maintaining and making sure you're leveling high quality. You have release managers who are managing the process. Sometimes it's Scrum management type stuff, but they're managing the process to make sure the releases are happening on time and effectively. And then you have architects who are literally actually creating the ecosystem that you're working within and making sure that you have functional components that allow you to release and then also operate. And so I would say engineer is kind of a blanket term, and a release manager is the person who then helps manage that process between development operations.
Thanks, Russell. So would you say release manager kind of wears a little bit more of like a PM hat, and then DevOps wears a little bit more technical?
Yes.
Scrum hat. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is because, although not by title, like I'm the release manager for our team, but it's never completely pulled out from my job, which is interesting because I also oversee the operations side.
Yeah, and you can't assume that for those of you looking for roles in the ecosystem, don't assume that recruiters know what they're talking about. That's where you want to ask those questions. You know, we talked previously about interview questions, and you should be able to have some clarification questions when you're interviewing, kind of like interviewing the interviewer, because there's a multitude set of expectations. Most of you know me. We've networked on LinkedIn, and a lot of the things that I post on LinkedIn are for the connections that I have, especially the military ones. And just to give you a perspective, somebody reached out for me for a VP role, and they were an executive assistant 6 months ago. So it's, you gotta take it with a grain of salt on how well they can represent you, or they can represent the role that they're trying to fill. So the point there is, to ask clarifying questions, because I can't tell you how many times people assume that the developer was an engineer or the architect was an engineer. Non-tech people sometimes don't even know. They just, I need somebody that knows code, and that could be an admin, it could be a developer, it could be an architect. So sometimes we have to educate them.
Yeah, those are great points, Elio. Thank you. We are at time, folks. Iris, did you get your mic working? I saw that you commented to say thank you. Anything else you wanted to add?
Am I working?
You are. You're good.
I just want to say, I'm not going to lie. A lot of this conversation was over my head because I haven't looked at the developer role. But I speak to so many members of the military community who are looking for that path, and just having a resource that we can point them to now that gives a clear path, and you gentlemen being available, this is fantastic. I'm very excited to share with my network and just let people know about this.
Just ask them to connect. I'm always happy to talk about object-oriented programming to anybody that wants to listen. Which is few people. My wife still doesn't know what I do for a living.
And on that exciting note, it's pretty much time to close here. Real quick fun fact, Steve, I noticed that on your LinkedIn profile, you mentioned that you were an AT or avionics technician for the ALQ 99. I was an EA6B Prowler ECMO, so many years flying with those pods. Thanks for fixing them.
You're welcome.
Highly complex piece of gear, and I never knew exactly how it worked. I pushed the buttons they told me to push, and you guys made it work, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, before we do close, I'd like to thank Brooks, Ashley, Russ, Phil, Alexander, and Steve for co-hosting tonight's session. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been awesome getting your perspective on all the different topics between DevOps and development that we talked about. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us. Great time.
Thank you, everyone.
So much.
Thanks, everyone.
You all.
Yeah, my pleasure. Hey, guys, have a great rest of your Wednesday evening. Stay safe. We'll see you next week, and enjoy the rest of your week.